Hello and welcome to Curious Life, and today is the day. Today is the day that I get to share my first little renovation project with you. At least my first one for this year anyway. And that's our new boiler and the cupboard that it lives in. I know this feels like it's taken ages, and that's because it has. I did not expect it to take as long as it has, but it's been a bit of a saga for us. But we'll get into that later. I naively figured that this would maybe take me about a week to do, but it did not, and that is just not how life has gone so far in 2025. But we'll get to all that in a moment, and I cannot wait to show the finished results to you. But let's start by taking a look at what we're dealing with, and while we do that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Issa, and I make intentional living and homemaking videos with my wife Blaze. And this year we started out on a mission to start to renovate our house one project at a time. And this was the first. So this is the cupboard where our boiler lives, but it's also where we keep all of our bedding, our towels, and a lot of other bathroom stuff too. Obviously the boiler leaking was the thing that started this whole project off in the first place, and it is where we needed to start. But with that, we also started to notice just how bad the inside of this cupboard was. I feel like it's really easy to ignore places like this in our home. It's the kind of places that we use daily, but because they're behind closed doors, we just stop noticing all the problems. This cupboard has also seen a lot of changes over the years. It was originally built maybe about 70 years ago, but parts of it were rebuilt about 50 years ago, so it's had some layout changes, and it's also seen some changes in technology over the years too. When it was originally built, the toilet was outside. I mean, it's still outside, it still exists, but we don't use it. And I don't think it had a proper bathroom at the time. Not in the way we consider a bathroom to be now anyway. I am very, very grateful for indoor plumbing. But at that time, this house also wouldn't have had heating or radiators or anything like that. It was built with fires instead. So when a bathroom and indoor heating and hot water was installed, there had to be room made for it. So at one point there would have been a water tank in the loft, and there was also a heater or a tank in the cupboard that now houses the boiler. You can tell that because the remnants of all the pipes and fixings for it are still there. There were even some parts of the wall and things inside this cupboard that were burnt and scorched where there's clearly been some issues. So this was sort of the point of what we wanted to do. We wanted to make this cupboard a lot nicer to use, and although I know I'm not going to be able to make it perfect, not with my minimal DIY skills, but I can make a big improvement. It's amazing what even a lick of paint can do to lift a dark and dreary space. So that's the plan. The first step was to replace the boiler though. We did get some advice, and we possibly could have had it fixed, but it was at a point where it would have kept having problems and would develop more and more leaks and other issues, so we decided to just replace the boiler, which isn't cheap, but felt cheaper than having constant call-outs. We also had a lot of chaos to deal with as a result of the leak. This cupboard really does work hard for us, and as you can see from some of the clips, having to take everything out left us with a lot of chaos. And we've been in that similar state of chaos for the entire last 3 months, because it's only this last week that we've managed to finish this project. One of the things we needed to do was clean everything in the cupboard, so I had a lot of laundry to do. So the boiler turned out to be a little bit of a long and drawn out process. It wasn't terrible. We did have a working boiler within a few weeks. Our heating engineer was a lovely guy. He was really good at the heating engineering bits, and he was really enthusiastic and just lovely. But he also was a very scatterbrained character. Literally every time he visited, it became a bit of a running joke that within an hour he would have to come back again because he would have forgotten some tool or forgotten something, and he'd just have to turn around, come back and collect it. And it turned out he was pretty new at some aspects of this, that, like I said, the heating engineering and dealing with the gas was absolutely fine. He's clearly been doing that a long time, but he wasn't so confident with some of the other areas of plumbing because that's the bits that he's been focused on in his job, and he's actually quite a new business. So he was just trying to set up his own business, and we did get a really good price as a result of that. So it just took a little bit longer than we were expecting, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. We have time. And we are very happy, and it worked out in the end. We did have to have him back just because once the pipes are settled, they started to leak again. But that was sorted really, really quickly. And then we just had to start the process of drying out the cupboard, because by this point we had water leaking off and on for a few weeks. So everything was just very wet, and this was in January, which was the absolutely coldest and wettest weather we've had. And the air was really damp and nothing was drying out very easily. So we did buy a dehumidifier, and we ended up using a space heater as well, just to try and get the area dry. The dehumidifier was a bit of an investment because we do need to use it in various places in the house. If you saw our video at the beginning of the year where we go through the house and all of the places that needs work, you'll have seen that there are a lot of damp spots to sort out in the house, so this will be helpful. The drying out took a lot longer than I expected to, so my dreams of getting this project done in a week were fading very fast. But after a few weeks, everywhere was dry again and the work could start again. This has taught me a few lessons though that I need to consider. Because we do have a lot of small renovation projects like this coming up, I need to work out a way to do these projects and not live in chaos. Because we haven't been able to put any of the stuff that lives in that cupboard anywhere for this entire time, and it's only this week that we've been able to start to get back to normal. So if we're going to be doing lots of projects, I just want to find a way of dealing with that. I'm not sure what the answer is yet. Hopefully I'll find a solution. So I started the decoration by cleaning up the issues in the cupboard a little. This was things like taking out old nails, screws and fixings, and then filling holes. It was quite an awkward space to work in, so I haven't been able to get a perfect finish, but I am aiming for better rather than perfect, and that seemed like a standard I can achieve. I don't know why on earth I thought I could get all of this done in a week. I didn't take into account any time between doing things, like filling holes. I couldn't fill the big holes in one go, so I had to wait for the filler to dry before going back for a second time. And then every time I had to do that, it was a day or two to allow it to dry again. And then at the end, it was another few days before I could sand it down ready for painting. I also didn't take into account drying time between coats of paint too. It's silly really, because I have done all these things before. I know they take time and I know they need time to dry. So I could have thought about this beforehand, I just didn't. My brain had decided to completely omit all of that information when I was planning. So that's definitely a lesson I need to take forward. Then the last part of prep that needed doing was cleaning the cupboard out properly. Not only was this from all of the dust from the sanding and getting the boiler fitted, but I also don't think this cupboard had been cleaned out like ever. I don't think we've really considered cleaning it properly in the last 10 years, and I am not convinced anyone who lived here in the decades before that did either. So this was definitely an overdue task that I'll have to add to my ongoing cleaning routines. Blaze helped me with this part, and obviously at every stage of this renovation, Millie the cat had to come and offer some supervision too. finally on to painting and organising this cupboard. I chose to do everything in just white. I'm not actually a huge fan of bright white in general because I find it a little bit stark and clinical, and the only other white we have in the house is like an off-white and much more of a creamy white, so it's a little less harsh than that really bright white. However, in a small space like this, where the only thing you're doing is trying to see to put things away or look for an item that you want, then bright white is definitely the best option because it bounces the light around and is just brighter. So I chose a brilliant white for the walls, and I also chose a brilliant white gloss for the other things. The walls took about 4 coats of paint in total, because as with everything else in this cupboard, it's not been painted in decades. So although I think the original colour was meant to be white, it had faded and discoloured and had become a really strange, dirty and faded yellow colour. So that's definitely something that will probably have to be repainted every now and then. So we did choose a white gloss to paint the wooden shelving and the cupboard door, and this took about 3 coats of paint to go from wood to a gloss finish. We actually did consider whether or not to keep the wood plain or paint it, but decided in the end that painting it would just be easier to clean, it'd look brighter, and if we have any more small water leaks or spills in the future, the water should sit on top of the paint rather than soak into the wood. Larger leaks will still be a problem, but for small spills this will be easier. We are so close to being done now. I just need to sort out some of the chaos and put it back into the cupboard. I did want to be a little more organised this time, so I bought some plastic containers to organise things into. We opted for boxes with lids this time, just because of how much of a nightmare it was when we had open boxes in here and the water from the boiler got into everything. Bathroom organisation is always a bit of a struggle because there are just so many things to organise, and some things are big, and then there are just lots of tiny things and small categories. So I've gone with organising into big containers in big categories like towels and bedding. And then we also have a box for extra toiletries and things like that. And I'll organise that into smaller boxes inside so everything has a place. That's the idea anyway. We did also decide to label everything, but this is another area I didn't think ahead, so when it came to labelling, I didn't have the vinyl needed for the Cricut. So I used post-it notes while I waited for more Cricut supplies to arrive. I love our Cricut and the vinyl labels we can make, and they do tend to be more durable than our cheap label maker is, but it's not always the easiest method. It's definitely not as easy as people make it look anyway, and it's also not the cheapest of options either, and I don't really think it's entirely necessary. I think the key to labelling in that nice Pinterest way you see online isn't necessarily to have a Cricut and make fancy labels for everywhere, but instead just pick a label maker or a set of stickers that you like and stick to the same look and font throughout the entire house. Then everything looks coordinated, but without the cost and the hassle of expensive vinyl options. I actually only use the Cricut very occasionally, and I usually get Blaze to do it because she has a lot more patience than I do. And then only when I'm really certain that things will be staying the same for a long time. For organisation that changes a lot, I just use our cheap label maker. But we're also not going for that perfect Pinterest look either. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would be absolutely lovely, but our house and organisation needs change so often that it's just never going to look that way. So we opt for a slightly less aesthetic look that is practical and works for what we need. It still looks a whole lot better than unorganised and unlabelled, and progress not perfection is our household motto. And we are finally onto the before and after section. I cannot believe how much of a difference some paint and filling holes in a wall make. The cupboard was just always a dark and dingy space where we put stuff, And even though it's still a dark cupboard where we put stuff, at least it isn't dingy now. I even put in a motion sensor light so that we can have some light in there too, which helps hugely. It still does feel a little bit cluttered in here to me, but that's because it is. It's a realistic cupboard that has to contain a lot of stuff, so we've definitely gone for practicality with the organisation. I'm also so glad that we have a working boiler that doesn't leak now. This was not how I expected to start the year at all, but here we are and it's done now and it feels so good to have this finished. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. We have a lot more to come. And I'll be doing a little update video in a few weeks to update you on what the plans are for the house renovation projects and some of the things that we've started already. As well as I'll tell you about the problems we've dealt with so far this year, with things breaking and needing replacing. So look out for that soon. But for now, I will say goodbye and I hope you have a lovely day.